and welcome to this edition of Joy in Our Town. I'm Ann Farrell Tata, your host, and today I'm delighted to welcome Karen Jackson. Karen is the Executive Director of the Faith Inclusion Network, and our topic is family, and our issue today is turning disability into ability. So thank you for joining us today, Karen. It's so nice to have you here. So Faith Inclusion Network, can you tell us a little bit about what it is and how you came about to start it?
Yes, Faith Inclusion Network is a nonprofit, all-volunteer interfaith organization that works to create more awareness about people with disabilities, including them in faith communities.
And what made you start it?
Well, quite a few years ago, actually, about 15 or more years ago, one of my three children, my daughter Samantha, was diagnosed with autism, and the behaviors associated with autism and the challenges there made it really difficult to attend church. Definitely to attend church as a family at all. It was really a kind of my husband and I would take turns. It really wasn't going well, and so at that time, when she was first diagnosed, I wasn't really ready to do anything, but I was just trying as hard as I could to take care of everybody.
Right.
But a few years later, in 2008, I was ready to try to see if our church, and in fact it was a new church for us, would be interested in trying to help us include our daughter. At that point, she was 9 years old, who has, had been diagnosed with a more severe autism, and definitely a lot of challenges, just even with sitting still, being, what it's like, when you go to worship in
Right.
a lot of churches, the requirements are to sit still,
Right.
to be quiet, to listen, to go to maybe Sunday school or religious ed, and none of that was going to work for her at that point. So there was a lot of awareness that needed to be done, and a lot of just learning about how best to include her. And that's actually at a church in Norfolk that we're still at, Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church.
So I do definitely want to talk about Samantha specifically, but before we go there, so when you first started, you had this need. You had these three children, and then you have this one that required special attention, and you didn't really figure there wasn't really a way to address that. So when you started the Faith Inclusion Network, what were your steps, and how did you sort of rectify that problem?
Well, I'll back up. One step before Faith Inclusion Network is as an effort at trying to connect with other families at Blessed Sacrament, which had become my new church. We started a support group, I met a lot of other parents from not just from that church, but from all over the area, Norfolk and Virginia Beach and even Chesapeake, and realized that, hey, wait a minute, I wasn't the only one having this challenge.
Yeah.
And as I began to understand that, and that it was a challenge in all denominations across the board, and even in different faiths, I figured out that we needed to kind of bring people in the community together who understood this challenge and wanted to work to make our faith communities more inclusive. And so that's really where Faith Inclusion Network started in 2008, was just one big meeting we had, and grew from there. For now we do events and have a lot of resources.
So what are some of the things that they do to accommodate people with disability in churches?
Well, a lot of churches will start with a disability ministry for children, so trying to, if there's a child with a disability, they want to include them in Sunday school or religious education. They'll pair them up with a partner, either an adult that can help. They call that shadowing.
Yeah.
Or they might just need another teen, an older student who might be helpful. It kind of depends on the situation.
Right.
In other cases, the disability might be severe enough that the child is not comfortable, or the person is not uncomfortable in the complete inclusion setting at that point, and they might pull them out to do some religious education work individually or in small groups. There's really a wide range of how it's being done, so it's not really about one way to do it and how to be accommodating and welcoming is just making that effort that I think is really important.
What a great resource you are for people that have kids that have been diagnosed, because you wouldn't even know where to start, like as you found yourself.
Right, yeah.
So let's talk about Samantha. So what number child is she?
She's the second of 3.
So was your third already born when she received her diagnosis?
No.
And then you noticed something and took her to the doctor, and
Right. Well, we did have a fairly early diagnosis. They actually cannot diagnose autism quite early now. She was 2 years old when we started doing testing, and she really didn't have any words. She wasn't verbal. So that was our pretty early indicator that there was an issue going on. But you don't normally get the definite diagnosis until 3 or even 4 years old. It just kind of depends.
So you were sort of monitoring it, but not really, you didn't know for sure for a couple more years.
Yeah, it took a while. But there were definitely issues. I mean, she wasn't talking, so that made it
you knew something
challenging.
Was. So, and you wrote a book about this.
Right.
About your journey. And how did your faith play a role in all this?
Well, it was interesting. At first, I was like everyone else. And, a lot of parents, when they get a diagnosis like this, whether it's autism or Down syndrome or whatever the significant diagnosis is, you immerse yourself, try to learn everything you can about it.
Yeah.
So I spent years, reading and trying to go to different meetings and learn about what autism was and what to do. I was so bogged down in that I didn't even have time to think about how in the world am I going to get her to go to church, and what's that going to look like. It took a while. Then when it started to dawn on me, I thought, I have no idea how to do this.
Yeah.
And no one at the church we were attending had any idea either.
Yeah.
And so it just sort of, you just keep going, and you're concentrating on just getting through the day. I try to tell people when I'm talking about, if they don't have experience with disability and understand what that's like in families, families are just trying to get through the week. They don't have the resources or the energy to advocate on Sundays as well, or Saturdays or Sundays when they're worshiping. So a lot of times that goes by the board for them unless someone in the faith community isn't trying to really help work and advocate and accommodate and make it work, the worship and religious education and so forth work for them.
Right. So what are some of the sort of assumptions or myths about a child with a disability that you've come across in your experience?
Well, I think obviously I can best speak to someone who's a parent of a child who has autism, and that is that every child who has autism is very different. You've probably heard that it's an autism spectrum disorder, and the myth or whatever that they used to say about autism, like they didn't want to be touched, or they didn't want to look at you, or you didn't have the eye contact. And certainly sometimes these things are true, but we found with our daughter she's very much connected with us.
Oh, wow.
And her family. Now, yes, it is hard for her to make connections with other people, but she definitely does. So I would say that would be one of the major things, that people with autism can't connect with other people.
Right.
I think they can. You just have to really understand a little bit about it and take them like we should with everybody, right? Take them as individuals.
As individuals, that's right. That's a good point. So what about, how do you, well, first of all, when you were first dealing with this, did you, cry out to God and ask Him, why did this happen? Or did you just sort of, tell me a little bit about what that was like for you?
I think I went through a lot of the typical stages of grieving.
Yeah.
So that happens a lot when there's a diagnosis with a child who has disability, and that whole grieving process where you're angry. I don't think I spent a lot of time angry, but I definitely spent a lot of time sad.
Yeah.
And feeling out of control and You know, what are we supposed to do? But I was able to channel a lot of my energy, like I said, into just learning more about it. So that sort of saved me.
Right.
I'm an educator too. I, you know, was very much about like, okay, what are we going to do now?
Yeah.
So, but there's a still, I mean, the grieving is very cyclical, and during different stages of her life, up to now, and she's 19 now, we certainly I've gone through the grieving again, you know,
right.
and she just became an official adult last year at 18, you know, and all the things that your typical person might be doing, graduating from high school, going to college, things like that, she's not doing. So, you know, you have to work through all that as a parent too. So it's really an ongoing process.
The different stages as they grow. How about her siblings? Have they, I bet they're much more sensitive to people with disabilities.
I think they definitely are, and they're also her brothers. She has an older brother, Joseph, who's now in college, and a younger brother who just started at a local high school, and he actually is at the same high school as her, which is amazing. And they're both great in their own ways in understanding her and being her friend and taking care of her. And
so what would you say to a parent that's watching that has just recently been diagnosed, let's again, because you can speak to that, their child has been diagnosed with autism. What would you say?
Well, I think the most important thing is to realize that you can't do it by yourself. That I've been blessed with amazing community, not just the Faith Inclusion Network and people I know through there, though certainly they are huge, you know, been really amazing encouragers and supporters, but just, you know, your normal community of neighbors and friends and faith, you know, people in your congregation. You know, if you're open to sharing and telling them what they can do to help, then it just makes, you know, it can really make your life so much better and enrich, you know, everyone's life if they understand. A lot of people get secluded as parents of children, especially the primary caregiver.
Yeah.
One thing, and I've experienced this with my daughter, that people with autism, but any disability can experience, is that they can't go and do the typical things you do to connect with other parents.
Oh, right.
So that they feel very much on the outskirts, and they don't have a strong network of parent support. And I just still remember trying to go to a church event and being there, but my daughter's running around, so all I'm doing is taking care of her, and I'm not really able to be connected.
Right, with any other parents.
So one of the things, you know, we try to teach in faith communities is like really to be aware of what that family needs, and maybe all it is a little support to watch the child so the parent can go worship, or the parent can go have fun at a potluck supper, or whatever it is you're doing, you know. I think there's a lot of different ways that parents can, but they have to be able to say, okay, I need to get out there, I know I need support, and I need some help.
And it helps, though, if they know that there's something out there, because it's one thing to say you need help, but then if you're not knowing what to do.
Right.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to not only continue our conversation, but maybe you can help talk to some of these parents who are looking for help and can guide them with the Faith Inclusion Network. I'm Ann Farrell Tata. You've been watching Joy in Our Town. If you'll stay with us for just a short break, we'll be right back, and we'll see you in a minute. Hello, welcome back to this edition of Joy in Our Town. I'm Ann Farrell Tata, your host, and we have been joined today by Karen Jackson, the Executive Director of Faith Inclusion Network. And our topic is including people with disabilities in the faith communities. So thanks for staying with us, Karen. So you were talking a little bit about your own experience with your daughter, Samantha, and how you started this Faith Inclusion Network to help other parents connect with other people and address some of the specific needs with people with disabilities in the faith community. So what have you seen, or can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in the faith communities as far as coming together to help address some of these issues?
Yes, well, I would say really we've been working about 9 years. We're going on have our 10th anniversary in 2017, which seems hard to believe. We've seen a lot of faith communities starting to develop disability ministries or efforts to be more accommodating and welcoming. This has become a topic that they're trying to address, whether it's start a program, start shadowing for younger children who have disabilities in religious education. Some have started respite programs to give some support to caregivers. There's a lot of different ways that faith communities are starting to recognize that this is an issue that needs to be addressed so that people who have disabilities can be included and their families can be included.
Right.
So there's a multitude of things, but those are the main things.
Now, do you go to different, churches or synagogues and sort of tell people about it, or how do you spread the word out?
We have, one thing we do is we hold various events, smaller meetings. In fact, we have one coming up soon about caregivers, but then also bigger events like conferences where we bring in speakers from around the country that share about what is happening and how to begin disability ministries, what's on the horizon, different books and resources. We often have a lot of authors that come in and are part of our conference. So we do events. Yeah. We also have a website with resources on it, faithinclusionnetwork.org, and those, there are books and various guides and curriculum from different denominations that are all listed there. We also are working really hard to develop this, but have faith communities that have an advocate or just a contact person that is willing to be listed, and they're on our website by city and then denomination.
Oh, wow.
So you can look up, say you're new to the area, and we know we're a very transient area. You can look at, say you know you're going to be here, you have attended a Methodist church, you're interested in finding a Methodist church, you might want to, if you're anything like, it's been my experience that I wouldn't just drop in somewhere new and expect that things were going to be all set up. I want to contact someone ahead of time, and so this gives you the opportunity to see, oh, well, I live in Virginia Beach, and this United Methodist Church has an adult program for adults with disabilities. Great, they're probably going to be someone understanding and accommodating in my situation. I will give them a call.
That's
great. We're developing that. We definitely have a big list of faith communities that have been involved with our events. Not all of them are yet listed on our website, but there's certainly enough people there that you can get an idea that this is definitely an effort that has been growing in the last 10 years.
Well, now, when you talk about the disabilities, I mean, as you said, Samantha has autism, others have Down syndrome or a physical handicap, cerebral palsy. How do you, and also the age, how do you sort of, like a disability ministry, how does that work in a church as far as, how do you break it down?
Well, there's...
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know.
Like, I don't know what the terminology...
I know. It can be so many different things. Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, you could have one person who's sort of leading an effort to bring more awareness, to provide more accommodations. There'd be one church that maybe have a really old church that doesn't have wheelchair accessibility. Oh, maybe a project would be to build a ramp for them.
Yeah.
And that's been... I've seen that done. It seems hard to believe, but you'd be surprised because there are definitely older buildings that are not that accessible. Or more common, a second floor in a church or synagogue that doesn't have an elevator.
Oh, yeah.
So that could be a project for, trying to make the building more accessible. Then there's other faith communities that have been working on providing more of a social ministry. Certainly, there's quite a few in the area that are social ministries for people who have disabilities, and they gather. There's in quite a few, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, and they try to include people who have intellectual developmental disabilities, but physical disabilities too, and they all get together and they have fun. My daughter participates in one of them. So there's just a lot of ways to respond to this call, and it's done in many different ways. And then the great thing is Faith Inclusion Network tries to bring people together so they can share what they're doing.
Yeah.
So say that someone's just thinking about this or what they can do, they can learn from someone else, either in their denomination or not,
Right.
that is doing something. So it's great to be able to share, get together, and obviously network to share what's going on.
So there are a lot of support groups for parents that have children with disabilities.
There are definitely, I wouldn't say a lot, there are definitely support groups.
Yeah.
I actually participate in one that's in Norfolk, that's faith-based. There are support groups, different kinds, like CHKD has one for parents. They are not, they're sometimes just related to a specific disability, like cerebral palsy. So it just kind of depends, but there are definitely a lot, and we have a lot of things listed on our website to help locally with people looking for that kind of support.
So you also on your website, even though it's faith inclusion, you also have secular organizations that as resources, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So really people should go to your website, and because you also have not only, you have a lot of different disabilities, you have different resources.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly. Well, when we first started, a lot of people said, well, shouldn't we just be networking with faith communities? And my first thought was that, well, if we want to reach people who are finding going to church or synagogue or any kind of worship difficult because they either have a child with a disability or they have a disability themselves, you aren't going to find them in the faith communities. Where are you going to find them, and how can you get word to them? Well, you're going to be able to connect with them through the secular and medical resources in our area. So that's one of the main reasons we try to connect with them, so that we can share what we're doing. And because Faith Inclusion Network is an interfaith effort, most businesses and service providers and medical facilities are willing to share our information if people want to know about faith-related resources, so we can get that information out there.
So is your goal at Faith Inclusion Network to let every sort of house of worship have some kind of accommodation for people that
Well, I think it's really important that it become an issue at every house of worship, because anyone who says to me, well, we don't have anyone who has a disability, I will say, well, 20% of our population has some kind of disability, whether it be mental, physical, developmental, intellectual. So I find it hard that no one has a disability. If they don't, well, you're missing a really big part of the community.
Right.
People who can make a really big difference in your faith community and as part of your congregation. So I think it's really important to try to reach as many congregations as we can to offer. We want to offer our support, but even if they don't need our support, just say, hey, you need to bring this issue up.
I find that so hard to believe that there really are churches that say we don't have anyone with disability.
You'd be surprised at how many times I've actually heard those words.
Oh my gosh! Because you don't want to argue with them, but surely that there is and if not in their immediate congregation, certainly
people in
neighbors
the
or
affected,
absolutely.
And there's a lot. You can go into. There's a lot of hidden disabilities where people have mental illness and so forth. In fact, last year we just did a whole workshop on mental illness.
Oh yeah.
So
which is a disability, can be very disabling.
Yeah.
But going back a little bit, and we didn't really touch on this in the first segment, but making your disability an ability. What does that look like, and what do you mean by that?
Well, what I would mean by that is that every person, regardless of their perceived ability or disability, has something to contribute.
Oh, yeah.
And, certainly I never thought I would be doing anything like this and advocating in the faith communities and so forth. And so in my life, it's really and experiencing disability, not maybe personally myself, but disability in my family has really completely changed my life. And I'm very passionate about making faith accessible to all people. But I think of all the people I encounter, from my own daughter who's in my house to people in the community and people who have been on our board of directors and people who have spoken for Faith Inclusion Network, all these people that may have a disability that you could recognize, they have a lot of important things to contribute.
Yeah.
So we need to recognize that and let them do that.
Right.
And Faith Inclusion Network, when we put on an event, we try very hard to be accommodating, so that even if it's a person who might not see, or someone who is deaf, we make sure that in every way people can come and participate and be part of what we're doing.
That's fantastic. How about, because I know my church has a healing service, and do you, offer, is that one of the resources that, because I'm sure there are many churches that have healing services, and just for someone that might want to take their child to that kind of service.
Well, you touch on a very, very interesting topic, because a lot of people with disabilities do not feel like they need to be healed of anything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand completely what you're saying, and there are some
physical healing too. You're right, though. But
there are some people who. There are some faith communities I know of that do have healing ministries, but I think that you have to be very careful when you're talking about that, because certainly I know a lot of people who experience disability themselves that are fine with that, and they're all about saying, I'm okay the way I am, and that has been a barrier in the past, I think, for people with disabilities in faith communities, that they felt like people are like,
I walked right into that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You're right. You're right. It's all about perception and educating people so they'll know.
It's really, and Finn is all about educating and awareness and just trying to help faith communities and people experiencing disability, but faith communities to understand what can be done, what kind of resources there are out there. I mean, no one's saying that it's easy. It's going to be easy to take a child who's nonverbal and has a lot of autistic behaviors running around and include her in a meaningful way at church, but it can be done, and there are resources written that can give guidance. And a lot of times when I consult with different faith communities, they will say, what can I use? And I say, well, here we've got this already written. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, people. It's there.
Just access this.
It's just finding it, and that's what Finn is trying to do, put it all together.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. You only have about 5 seconds, but if you want to say your website really fast.
Sure, it's faithinclusionnetwork.org.
Oh, Karen, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for correcting me. I really appreciate that as well. I'm Ann Farrell Tata. Thank you so much for watching Joy in Our Town today. We will see you next time. Thank you so much.